Hello and welcome to Aviadev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of Aviadev Africa. Aviation can be much maligned as an industry, and we're all very conscious of the challenges that we face head on every single day. But we must also not lose sight of the fact that aviation has a unique way of solving unique problems. And today I'm delighted to say we're going to highlight just one of those instances that aviation has been used as a force for good and share an uplifting and African story with you. Now, my special guest today is a good friend of mine, Will Travers OBE, who is the founder and executive president of the Born Free Foundation. Will has led the foundation since inception 4 decades ago, just celebrated its birthday in the last week. And the foundation focuses on the preservation, protection, and rescue of wild animals in need, finding solutions to ensure humans and wildlife can coexist peacefully. And the reason we're speaking today is there's just been an incredible animal relocation that we've been working on and speaking about for quite a while now. And it happened just 2 weeks ago. So we're here to tell that story. So Will, welcome to the podcast.
Very nice to see you, John. Thank you for having me on.
It's our absolute pleasure. We love to share these kind of stories. Let's get straight into it. Talk to us about Tsar and Jamil. Tell us about how their story started and how Born Free got involved.
Sure. Tsar and Jamil are two now 3-year-old-ish lions brothers, and their story began in Ukraine when they were born into a zoo. I didn't stay in the zoo for very long. They, as tiny cubs, were moved to a farm, an ostrich farm, as I understand it, where they were the star turn. They were the attraction, but they were not looked after in a good way. They were malnourished. Subsequent investigation showed that one of them had broken bones, real problems, terrible welfare. And so they were moved. They were rescued in Ukraine by a Ukrainian animal welfare organization. But that was just before the sort of global tragedy, quite frankly, of the war in Ukraine broke out, the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so these two lion cubs, along with hundreds of thousands, millions of people, were in a terrible predicament. Luckily, with the help of the Ukrainian Animal Rescue Organization, a Polish zoo, and our very good friends at the Nature Help Centrum in Belgium, who we've known for years, they were spirited out of Ukraine and taken to NHC, Nature Help Centrum in Belgium, where it's a kind of temporary holding facility. Those guys don't set themselves up to be the long-term answer to these sort of problems. But we've worked with them for many years, and so we try and find the next phase, the sort of lifetime phase for animals that are temporarily rescued. And it's pretty complex stuff. The amount, you wouldn't believe the amount of paperwork that's necessary. And it's compounded, John, because they came from Ukraine. And were spirited out. So it's like, how do we get verification on the paperwork? How does that all get sorted out? There's the CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species paperwork. There's the veterinary clearance paperwork. There's the export paperwork, the import paperwork, the vaccination paperwork. There's just a ton of things that need to be done. Luckily, we do have considerable experience at Born Free doing this, going way back to the very first animal rescues we did in the late 1980s with tigers from the UK. They were owned by a taxi driver in the county of Kent on the Isle of Sheppey when that sort of thing was allowed. And ultimately, they ended up in India with our support. But Tsar and Jamil now were 2.5 years old, and we were desperately keen to get them to our lifetime facility at Shamwari Private Game Reserve in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, where we have actually 2 centres where we have rescued big cats. The only way to do it is by air. And so with enormous good fortune, we managed to secure the support of Cargolux out of Luxembourg, who are a specialist carrier. Actually, quite specialist in moving animals as well. I think they do a lot of the horses and other animals as well. But they said they'd step up and come in. British Airways Holidays, they weren't the actual carrier this time, British Airways, because Cargolux had managed to come to an agreement on that. But British Airways Holidays, one of our core partners as well, they provide the next 3 years of lifetime care. The old Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals statement, which is a dog is not just for Christmas, applies just as much to a rescued lion. A rescued lion is not just for now, but a rescued lion is forever. And these guys could live another 17 years. They could live to the age of 20. So lifetime care is super important. And then other players come in, the support players. So DHL in South Africa did the ground logistics. Michael Falls from Pride of Africa Wildlife Solutions, lots of the paperwork and compliance issues were handled by him. Our fantastic team at Shamwari, who we've now been working with for decades, Glenn, Catherine, and Johan, Dr. Johan Joubert, who's a preeminent wildlife vet, head up the team there that will provide Tsar and Jamil with quality life for the rest of their lives. They can't go back to the wild. It's really hard to return big cats to the wild now. Where would you put them? What about the risks to human life for an animal that might be relatively habituated to humans, not afraid of getting up close and personal? I think it can be done in very rare occasions, but usually starting with much younger animals that are in their formative years and will learn to be wild again. They're always wild, but learn to have a healthy fear for humans. There's one of the greatest safety things for wild animals is to be afraid of people and not get too close, because that's when the real problems happen. So they'll live the rest of their lives in a large natural enclosure, several acres enclosure, the size of a rugby field, and they will have choice. They'll be able to do what they want there, go in, out of the indoor enclosure, out into the main enclosure when they want. They'll get proper food, they'll get veterinary care should they need it, they'll get enrichment so that their lives are interesting. One of the things we do, John, is we build a platform in the enclosure, because what we've learned, and others have learned too, is that big cats like to have a perspective. They like, if you think of lions that you may have seen on film or in the flesh in the wild, why are they up on that termite mound? Why are they sitting up on that raised piece of earth? Why are they up on a tree? Because they like to have that broad vista. They like to see what's going on. It's not that dissimilar from your domesticated cat. Likes to see what's happening. So we build platforms they can climb up and have a good view out and see what else is going on around them. And then we also have in Shamwari in South Africa an education centre, an education operation, where we subsidize bringing kids from the local communities who often have never really seen their own wildlife. And we bring them not only to Shamwari to see wildlife in the wild, but we also bring them to see these rescued animals that can't go back to the wild. And we tell their stories, because there's something really important and profound about saying to young people, these are the victims of human exploitation. They shouldn't be here. They shouldn't have been in captivity in the first place. But we're also a responsible species. We will take responsibility for our actions, or at least some of us will, and we'll look after them for the rest of their lives, and we'll tell you their stories, and maybe that will mean that there'll be fewer big cats in captivity in the not too distant future. So it's a very good circular proposition, and of course aviation plays a significant role. And just to give you an example, so some people say, for example, when you flew them to South Africa, why didn't you fly them from Joburg to Port Elizabeth? Why go 10 hours, 12 hours by road? And it's because the aviation sector uses commercial planes, and commercial planes don't always have cargo doors. The big long-haul international ones do, but the smaller commercial aviation companies have smaller planes, and they have not got big enough cargo doors to put a lion crate in. It's a particular size to meet the International Air Transport Association regulations. So it has to be that size. We can't change that. And therefore, if it doesn't fit through the cargo door, we can't put them on a plane.
Yeah, and lions are a decent size as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, I've seen the video. So what I'll do for everybody listening is I'll share a link to the Born Free. You should all follow the page, but there's a really lovely video. And just the thing I think that got me towards the end of the video was the gentleman who talks about the lion sniffing the air and thinking, I'm home, I'm back in Africa. And that compared to being brought up on an ostrich farm in Ukraine, where just everything is not right for their upbringing, makes really brought it home. I think from the aviation side, of course, it makes so much sense that Cargo Lux, being a cargo specialist, was your carrier. Obviously, it was a big 747 that took them down, I think, to South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the help, obviously, with DHL and, of course, with the airport company down there in South Africa to facilitate all of this. But I'd like to know your relationship and your partnerships with African airlines and African partners. Have you got very far with this, and what more could they be doing? And are you keen to explore more of this? Because they're the guys that are listening to the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Aviation in Africa, from my experience, is very diverse. There's lots and lots of carriers, including lots of very small carriers. There's a great deal of opportunity. And aviation offers, for an organization like Born Free, three different things. It offers the opportunity to help us with projects like this relocation. It also helps us if we need to fly to see our projects, take people to see our projects. Support in that area is always hugely appreciated. But it also is a public platform. Aviation, air companies carry people. And it's a captive audience. You're sitting in the aircraft for an hour, 2, 5, 10, and once you've watched another movie, you maybe want to do something else. And it's a way of us, if we're working with that particular company, it's a way of us telling our stories and inspiring people to engage with what Born Free does. But also, in truth, many of the people who travel to many parts of Africa and within Africa are doing so for leisure purposes, for tourism purposes. And tourism is significantly directed towards wildlife in many countries. And our job, part of our job, is to try and, as our slogan says, keep wildlife in the wild. If those passengers, I'm going to put it in simple terms, want to come back in 5 years' time and see wildlife in the wild, or in 10 years' time, or bring their children or their grandchildren in 20 or 30 years' time, then we all have a responsibility to do what we can to make sure that wildlife is still there for us to see, and for the role that it plays in ecosystems and ecosystem services and the health of the planet as a whole. Just by way of example, elephants actually play a very critical role in both seed dispersal. There are seeds that will not germinate unless they've passed through the gut of an elephant. So they are absolutely critical to the survival of that tree species. But elephants are also incredibly important for carbon sequestration. A forest with elephants sequesters around 7 or 8% more carbon than a forest without elephants. They're part of the climate change solution, they're part of the biodiversity solution, and they're a reason for people to come and see wildlife, which helps drive the wildlife economies of Africa. Kenya, for example, about $2 billion US a year is generated by wildlife tourism. It's super important. Now, it would be naive to think that there weren't some challenges that come with having large, dangerous wild animals living in your country near your home. But the other prong of what Born Free is about is to try and encourage coexistence by finding practical solutions, adopting practical solutions. Just by way of example, we are installing beehive fences around people's crops in the northern part of Kenya at the moment. It's a technology that was developed by our friends at Save the Elephants, who've been doing it for years. Dr. Lucy King pioneered it, but we're implementing it in a different place, not where she's working. And what that does is it not only protects the crops, elephants and bees don't get on. So if you put up a beehive fence, which is posts with suspended beehives and wire between them, it's not a wire that's a barrier, it's a wire that's a trigger. So if the elephant comes and knocks the wire, the bees are agitated, they come out of the beehive, the elephant doesn't like bees, so turns and runs. And so the crops are saved. The elephant hasn't been hurt. We haven't had conflict with local people. And there is a byproduct, honey, which the local community can either use themselves or can take to market. So it really is a very much a win situation. Finding those technologies and encouraging peaceful coexistence between wildlife and humans is incredibly important. And again, I would just say that, for example, in Kenya, when I first went as a boy, aged 5, in 1964, the number of people living in Kenya was around 9 million. Today, there are around 55 million people living in Kenya. And yet, the amount of land that is available for wildlife is actually on the increase. The number of elephants has doubled since 1989, after the poaching crisis of the 1980s and 90s, early 90s. The wildlife populations have recovered, and the elephant population, as I say, has more than doubled. The rhino population is up by 300% from its low point, and lion numbers are up by 25%. Against that background of a quintupling, if there is such a word, of the human population, something is going right, but we have to embrace that, we have to harness that, and we have to do more.
Absolutely, yeah, good call. And I think it would be remiss of us today to talk, and we've done the good side of it, but we also have to talk about the dark side of aviation in terms of its role in some of the practices that we don't want to see. Mm-hmm. And of course, many of the wild animals that find their way into the wrong hands and into the wrong parts of the world, and how they got there in the first place, many of those are transported by air. How do you see this? How much engagement does Born Free have to prevent this from a look, airlines, look, airports, you've got to be careful what you're handling here. You have a responsibility to make sure that the animals, if you are transporting animals, they're not trafficked and they're going to the right place. How big a problem is it? And what is it that you guys are doing about that? And what more do we need to know?
Yeah, it is. It's a huge problem. The illegal wildlife trade is estimated to be the fourth biggest illegal wildlife activity in the world. If you don't include plant species and don't include fish species, it's worth around 20 billion US dollars a year. And if you do include those two other sectors, it's 10 times that. It's 200 to 300 billion. That's the illegal trade. There is an even bigger legal trade, which I have to say I'm very skeptical about the sustainability of the legal trade, because I'm not sure it's really necessarily as sustainable as we think. But so airlines can play a role in this, particularly when you're talking about really high value items that you would run through an airline operation as opposed to put in a shipping container and send by sea. I will use an example of perhaps a different country, Ethiopia. So we have a rescue center in Ethiopia. It's the only one in the country, Wildlife Rescue Center. We were enormously fortunate. The late President Girma of Ethiopia identified the site for us, and we've been operating there now for quite a while. We have lions, we have primates, but we also have cheetah. And those cheetah are the target for the illegal wildlife trade. They are shipped up into the Middle East as pets, as status symbol pets. The estimate is somewhere between 200 and 300 a year travel up, some by air, and means that a great number also die in the process. Not just the ones who are caught and shipped, but in the process of capture, you may lose others. So the pressure on the incredibly fragile wild cheetah population of Africa, only 7,000 cheetah in the wild in Africa. Now you imagine you're taking 200 to 300 cubs a year into the pet trade, and probably double, treble that number die in the whole sort of process of trade. It's a massive negative impact. We have a number of rescued cheetah at our center. I hope perhaps not these ones, I'll be honest with you, but I hope that one day we will be able to establish a process by which some of them can go back to the wild. But so what can we do about that, and what can we do with the airlines, whether it's Ethiopian or whether it's Kenya Airways or whoever it is? We want to help advise those airlines about the best possible protocols for making sure that they can verify the source of any animal any animal or plant, quite frankly, that they're shipping. That has been not just verified as coming from a reputable supplier, but that the supply itself is sustainable. I'm personally against the trade in wild animals. I think it's crazy. We should be putting our time and our effort into looking after wildlife in its natural habitat. But as an interim step, we need to make sure that the processes that we have are fit for purpose. And airlines have a huge responsibility in that, which is why it's really good, for example, that both Ethiopian and Kenya Airways and other airlines are part of the Royal Foundation Transport Task Force, which has been set up by Prince William and in the UK. We're part of the Transport Task Force, that's United for Wildlife. We're part of that Transport Task Force as well, always to try and not only improve processes, but make sure that if people break the law, that the full force of the law is brought to bear on them so that there is a strong deterrent to prevent this happening again in the future. It's certainly not perfect. But sitting down and working with airlines, looking at their policies and their protocols, improving them, making them as good as they can possibly be, making sure the sanctions are tough so that people are deterred from doing it in the first place. These are all parts of a very complex puzzle, and we make a small contribution to that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've come a long way. There's a very famous photograph from Ethiopian Airlines of them receiving a new aircraft, and there's a lion on a chain on the apron on the tarmac there. And it was like you say, it was a status symbol then. People have understood that these things change over time. So it's good to hear that these airlines are doing this, but of course they can do more. And we'd like to encourage those listening to obviously get involved with you. And for any of the listeners, I think what would be nice now is if there are an airline that wants to get involved and discuss how they can work with you, but also if they're an individual that's been inspired and wants to support the foundation, how are they best to do this? What's the next step?
Seriously, the next step is to write to me, because I can then direct people's interest to the right place within the organization, to our policy team, to our commercial team, and make sure that their interest, their generosity is fully recognized and that we try and do something about it. So write to me. My email, you may be able to put it up on the screen, but it'll be will@bornfree.org.uk. I'm always delighted to hear from people who genuinely want to make that difference. And interestingly, I know this isn't necessarily to do with the African aviation industry, but just in the last few days, there's been a couple of major carriers, and both carriers and holiday consolidators, who have declared that they're no longer going to, for example, promote in any way the captive use of dolphins. The whole sort of aviation and holiday sector is changing. When I first started out on this, John, just in the UK, we had 30 dolphin shows in the UK. We have no dolphins in captivity now, significantly down to the work that we've done for decades. When I started out, there was a Christmas special on every New Year, which was a circus, a televised circus with wild animals. There are no wild animals in circuses in the UK now. You have to take the long view. You have to be relentless, but you have to also take great encouragement from the fact that change is possible, and the airline industry can be a driver of change. And if we can work with any elements of the airline industry to accelerate that process, then we'd be delighted.
Yeah, absolutely. The change is driven by the sentiment of the customer, of the passenger. And we're seeing that with the growing need for sustainability messaging. There's obviously so much work, we talk about it all the time, into sustainability initiatives in aviation. This is just another example, which, like you say, the trend has been there over the years. And of course, everybody they think this magical experience of swimming with dolphins or whatever it may be. But the truth is, it's not the right way to deal with these dolphins. It's not the right environment for them.
No.
And the more we can educate and then say, look, there's still the opportunity to see them in their natural habitat, just have a real experience, And that's what Africa obviously offers when it comes to safari. We're not offering potted experiences, we're offering something real. And that's what's so magical about it. So, yeah, we here at AviaDev obviously look forward to supporting, keeping the message going, Will, from your side, and trying to get more of the airlines engaged actively to do this. And some of them are doing some great stuff. But it'd be fantastic to see a Born Free livery on one of the new airlines, the new aircraft that arrive or something like that, just to raise that awareness as that aircraft travels around the world, that this is something that the airlines are serious about. And same with the airports. There's messaging that the airports can offer too.
Absolutely. In fact, I think you've picked up on finally, you picked up on a really important point, and that is, I was talking about this with colleagues in Kenya. I arrived in Kenya first time in 4 years that I've been, and I was standing in the immigration line late at night, 9:30 at night, and there's hundreds of us. There's literally hundreds of us all in line waiting to get to the desks. And right behind the desk is a great big advertising hoarding saying, "You can advertise here." And I was thinking, yeah, maybe if I could find an airline partner to help fund it, we could have a message there which talks about, is very embracing, it's very welcoming, it's not a negative message. We can all put up negative messages about don't buy ivory and don't do this and don't do that. But the flip side of that is, do come, do experience wildlife in its natural habitat, travel responsibly, both as an individual and with the partners that you travel with, and be part of, in Kenya's case, Magical Kenya. You're a captive audience. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people stand in that line every year waiting to get their passport stamped, and they've got nothing to do. They're just like, that might be an interesting place to put a positive, uplifting, sustainable message. I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We know the team at the airport authorities. Yeah, you heard it here. Reach out to Will or myself and I'll put you in touch. But we'll make sure that Will's details, he gave his email earlier, but that's in the show notes. We'll put links to the website and to the social media pages as well. And really great to be able to share a really positive, uplifting story, Will. And I'm always inspired by the work that you and the whole team do at Born Free, and really appreciate the opportunity to have you on the podcast today. So thank you for joining us.
John, thank you. It's great to talk, as you say, positively about things. The world is consumed with negativity at the moment. So you have to grab those moments of light and enjoy them and elevate them and feed off those, because that's what keeps us going. Otherwise, we'd all be miserable all the time. And one thing I am never, and that is miserable.
That's very true. That is very true. And I would also say we don't do a good job as an industry. This is a message to the aviation industry of actually promoting what we do. We saw what happened through COVID. How would those vaccines have been distributed? What do we do in terms of connecting family and friends that live miles and miles apart? What do we do in terms of creating both economic development and jobs and all that wealth creation? If it's done responsibly, and especially in a place like Africa, as I always say, there is no alternative to connect destinations. But of course, we are working hard on the sustainability questions. We'll keep that message going. We're delighted that we're able to share something positive, and we will be back for the next episode very soon. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks again, Will, and see you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.